In October 2021, over 100 world leaders assembled in Glasgow to acknowledge the urgency of climate change. This summit was supposed to be a wake-up call, a turning point for this planet's future. But like all the summits that came before it, COP26 too ended up being a disappointment. It only gave developed nations a platform to list the sins of the developing world, their own transgressions notwithstanding. They set targets for others, goals to be achieved by 2050. Chief among them was ending coal burning, phasing out the world's reliance on coal. Europe pledged to lead the way. It promised to consign coal to history and shift to renewable sources of energy. 1 year on, the same Europe is leading the march in the opposite direction. Europe is conveniently turning back to coal, no questions asked. Tonight, we'd like to call out their hypocrisy. Why is Europe turning back to coal? Where does this leave their climate goals and the larger pledge they sanctimoniously took on behalf of the rest of the world? Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma. Europe is in crisis. It is running out of energy supplies. And to make up for this gap, it is ditching its green ambitions, ramping up coal imports and reactivating old power plants. The question is why? The answer is Russia. It has cut off gas supplies to Europe. And this has triggered a power crisis. Before the war in Ukraine began, 40% of Europe's gas supplies came from Russia. But since February this year, after Russia invaded Ukraine, the imports have fallen by 2/3. The impact is this. Oil and gas reserves in Europe are falling, energy prices have more than doubled, electricity bills are soaring by the day, and economies are bleeding. As many as 12 European countries could face energy poverty by this winter. So what does Europe do? It turns back to coal, back to using coal to generate power. Look at the recent developments. Last month, as many as 6 European countries reactivated coal-fired power plants. This was to compensate for the loss of Russian gas and to keep the lights on this winter. Germany was the first to do this. In the first week of July, Germany passed a legislation. It allowed coal-fired power. Coal plants were to be reactivated when supplies were low, and this will apply till 2024. So Germany plans to use coal power for the next 2 years at least. Same with Austria. They had a mothballed coal power station. It was shut in 2020. Austria is firing up its chimneys again. Then we come to the Netherlands. It has activated an energy crisis plan, removed caps on coal power plants, meaning it has lifted restrictions on burning coal for energy. It has allowed factories to run on full capacity until 2023. France too is on this list. It plans to restart a power plant this winter, go back to using coal to generate electricity. This is despite France implementing a zero coal policy in 2021. The UK too plans to join the bandwagon. Last month, the British government asked coal power plants to be on standby to generate electricity, to be ready to burn coal if asked to. Italy has issued a similar alert. Its energy plants are hoarding on coal. They're getting ready to get back in action. So European countries are reopening coal plants. Now here's a question. Where will they get coal from? Last we heard, Europe had pronounced coal mining as catastrophic. It had all but stopped producing coal. This chart will tell you how. In 1990, the production of hard coal in the EU was 277 million tons. By 2021, it fell to 57 million tons. This is a fall of 80% in 3 decades, and this is courtesy the EU's net zero goals. So they were making good progress, but now the goals have gone for a toss, and Europe wants coal to run its plants. Where will they get it? Where else but from the developing world? The EU has launched a hunt to secure coal supplies. In the month of June alone, it imported 7.9 million tons of thermal coal. Now, for perspective, around the same time last year, they got 2 million tons of coal. So this is an almost 4-fold jump. Now, look at the source. 1.2 million tons of coal came from Colombia, 854,000 tons from South Africa, and 1.1 million tons from Australia. And these are just the big suppliers. Europe is also importing more coal from Indonesia, Mozambique, Namibia, and Nigeria. Also, the United States of America, the global cop on everything, including climate change, is supplying coal to Europe. In June, coal imports from the US to the EU reached 618,000 tons, a 28% rise from last year. So you get the drift. Now, what will be the impact of these decisions? Emissions are expected to hit record levels. According to analysts, coal imports to the EU will be 43% higher next year. This will release an additional 10 million tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. 10 million tons. Where does this leave their climate goals? Their promise is to become carbon neutral. The EU is not talking about any of this. Running their air conditioners is evidently more important. In the meantime, studies like these are being offered as justification. This analysis was released by Ember. It is a UK-based non-profit think tank. It says short-term reliance on coal for emergency use will have little impact on Europe's climate commitments. And so there's no need to sensationalize the issue. Interestingly, on its website, this think tank also writes in bold, coal power must end to reverse the climate crisis. It's the single biggest contributor to climate change. What's worse, the same think tank lambasts developing nations, calls them out for not doing enough to adopt green energy. Now here's the thing. We know that desperate diseases need desperate remedies. We know that Europe is going through a power crisis. It needs to keep the lights on. But this was the same argument given by developing nations. They need power to run their factories. They lack sources of alternative energy. Their economies are more vulnerable to drastic shifts. Europe had none of it. It remained sanctimonious. It lectured the global south, told them to shut their factories and ration coal. And now that Europe is in a fix, it doesn't think twice before turning to coal. They're rich, they can buy coal. They can change the rules while keeping the moral high ground. They can change the goalposts. Because air conditioning in the first world cannot be switched off. And this is classic Western hypocrisy. Throwing money to get more oil and coal while telling the rest of the world to rely on solar and wind power. Refusing to take responsibility for historical emissions. Refusing climate compensation to developing countries. You may remember the Bonn climate talks in June. Developing nations sought a specific climate funding facility. They wanted financial aid to switch to renewable energy and cope with the impact of climate change, triggered by both the European Union and the United States. They consistently blocked discussions on the topic. They refused to provide climate-specific funds. How should the world deal with this high-handedness and this hypocrisy? First, the US walks out of climate commitments with a president who calls climate change a hoax. And now Europe switches to coal. What's the point of setting goals that no side intends to meet? Should the rest of the world too ditch their goals on net zero emissions? We say, two wrongs don't make a right. Climate change affects everyone, and everyone will have to share responsibility to do their bit. These episodes only highlight one thing, that the lecturers in the West have no leg to stand on.